I'll take you live right now to Lower Manhattan, New York City. Of course, this is September 11th. It's the anniversary of the 2001 terror attacks. That is presidential candidate Donald Trump at Ground Zero right now. His vice presidential candidate Vance is also there. J.D. Vance is there as well. You can also see people at the event this morning holding up pictures of their lost loved ones, of course, from that tragic day 23 years ago. Of course, current President Joe Biden and his vice president Kamala Harris, who, of course, is now in the running for president, also at this event this morning. This is the reading of the names. It's been happening every year since 9/11. 9/11, of course, is a day, a moment, a set in time, forever etched in history. It was the deadliest terrorist attack in North America. And of course, it resulted in the deaths of 2,977 people. Among those, 24 Canadians and the Basnicki family, who lost a husband and father, can continue to carry on his legacy. Brennan Basnicki is here this morning again on 9/11. Brennan, before we talk to you, I just want to run a quick piece of video here, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Kenneth William Basnicki.
That was you reading out your father's name at the reading of the names several years ago, right? Okay, so Brennan, appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
I can't imagine what this day is like. I mean, a lot of people, of course, have lost relatives, not nearly in the tragic circumstances as you, and you sort of share your grief, I suppose, with the world. How do you sort of think about this day as it approaches and then on the day?
That's a good question. I mean, it's 23 years later, it's still a very difficult day. I go back to when I was 16. And I was thinking about it this morning. I was like, what did I know of terrorism at that time? Like, all I really knew of it was what I saw in the movies. And, you know, as a 16-year-old, you're kind of in a bubble. And to have a terrorist event and, to have my dad, part of that was just a shock and so much confusion, as you can imagine. So it continues to be, a struggle. Obviously, through the years, we've had our grieving process, and we've channeled our efforts to, more positive things to focus on. But even 23 years later, before we started the segment, we were talking about, violence and war and terrorism. And, there's a lot of things that haven't changed, unfortunately. So still definitely a challenging day. Obviously, we've focused on, what we can do to, make the most of it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, National Day of Service is something you and your family have sort of really rallied behind, sort of created to try to encourage people to sort of not dwell on, I suppose, the negativity, but to sort of do something for the good. How has that effort and initiative been going?
Good in a lot of regards. So on the 10-year anniversary, it was marked a National Day of Service. Just 2 years ago, we had it marked provincially as well. So definitely some momentum, which is great. In the U.S., there is a ton of momentum behind this. Which is awesome. So we're making strides forward, and basically, we're trying to turn the day into that negative, shocking, really sad day into something more positive. And we try to remember, all the people that we lost, my dad, 24 Canadians, but also everything that happened following that. So immediately after September 11th, we had firefighters and paramedics cross the border, risk their lives in the recovery efforts. We had, I think it was 40,000 Canadian Armed Forces that ultimately went to Afghanistan to, serve. I think 162 that gave the ultimate sacrifice. So we try to reflect on all the positives in the aftermath and encourage Canadians to kind of reframe the day. Remember what happened, which is important, I think, particularly for the younger generation that hasn't experienced this to the same extent. So remember that negative aspect, but also focus on the positive aspect, which is very much aligned, with the Canadian identity and our values.
Yeah, it certainly lines up there as well. And when you take a look, this is part of the service, happening in New York today as they mark the anniversary. How intently do you watch on this day, or do you pay attention, or is this something that you do it your own way now almost?
I guess it's kind of. It changes every year. In the immediate years after, spent a lot of time in New York. I read the names on the 10th anniversary. More recently, I'd say over the last decade, we're trying to bring the focus back to Canada. And with National Day of Service, like even this year, for example, my personal life has been a lot busier. So today I couldn't, say take the day off, but what am I going to do? I'm going to give blood. And I think that's, a message I want to convey today is, so today is Canadian National Day of Service. It's an Ontario Day of Service. For a lot of people, taking a day off and volunteering is a big ask. It's not a holiday, but there are small things you can do. You can donate blood, buy a cup of coffee, visit a hospital, visit someone in need. Take 20 minutes, take 30 minutes, do something small, and really focus on that positive element, which we really saw in the aftermath of 9/11.
And let's focus on positive element. You kind of alluded to the busyness of your own personal social life. Congratulations on getting married just 3 weeks ago.
Thank you.
What a whirlwind that's been. Must be remarkable. I'm sure, of course, you would have wanted your dad to be there like anybody would.
Of course.
How did you sort of handle that day and keep Ken in mind?
Well, I mentioned him for sure. I gave my speech, and there isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about him. Unfortunately, our grandmother just passed the week before that, so my dad's dad. So it was a very it was a very emotional day, I guess you could say, for good and challenging reasons, I guess. Yeah, and you talked about how in America so much is happening on the National Day of Service, but Canada, it feels like it's lagging a little bit here. What would you like to see change, and who do you think needs to get behind it to see more action from Canadians on 9/11? I would rephrase that as it's lagging a lot.
Okay.
In Canada, we live very naively, in a bubble of sorts in terms of terrorism, in terms of a response, in terms of being proactive. So a sobering fact, this year, we're at the highest level of global conflict and war since World War II. It's very natural to think that, war and conflict is always, part of a life, and it is to a degree. But today, this is the most violent period since World War II. I think last year marked the highest year for global insecurity. So we kind of naively think that, we're isolated here in Canada. We have the United States to the south. Every few years, an event happens that reminds us in a very negative way, and we're not prepared. We're not being proactive in terms of combating terrorism, and then reactive. What do we do after, to mitigate that effect, to support the victims? And that's really where our focus is.
Who can help with that then? What do you see as the sort of person who can take the reins and lead that? I don't think that's the role you're looking for.
No, so we've tried to work with governments, cross-party. This is bipartisan, provincial and federal. And there's been, little bits of support here and there, but unfortunately, people don't tend to rally until after the fact. It tends to be very reactive, and then, something else can come up, and we kind of lose sight of that. So we are trying to raise that awareness, both in terms of the preventative, political side, creating, better legislation, better immigration policies, all these things. But then also, what do we do after? What happens when someone's affected, a Canadian's outside of Canada who's affected, or even worse, here? Yeah. And again, we kind of live naively with this false sense of security. I think there was a 6-week period over the summer where there was 5 or 6 arrests in 4 different terrorism-related cases in Canada. Yeah. And Canadians just don't pay attention to that.
Yeah, it's true. It's interesting, isn't it? Brennan, listen, I appreciate your time on such a big day for you. Thanks to you. Again, our continuing condolences to your family, but thanks for being here today. Always appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.